After the Ashes, England made a bit of a pig's ear of their World Cup defence. This wasn't Baz's fault because he wasn't the ODI coach, but was another black mark against Key, whose blue sky thinking in terms of preparation, basically it will be all right on the night, had backfired. Key flew to India after England had been effectively knocked out. Another empty gesture from one of the least substantial people in English cricket. England then blew the away series in India after going 1-0 up. The partial journalists excused defeat, saying it was impossible to win in India, and the 4-1 defeat there was better than the 3-1 defeat under Silverwood. The next couple of years, though, New Zealand and South Africa both whitewashed India in India, which highlighted how limited this England side was and how they had really blown a chance there. That summer, England whitewashed the worst West Indies side in their Test history and beat Sri Lanka 2-1. This was a series England would have won 3-0 under another coach, but a familiar pattern started to emerge where England at the end of the series looked to finish the series as quickly as possible. Rather than prioritising a win at all costs, they just looked to get home as quick as possible. England selected Josh Hull, a person who'd hardly played county cricket because he was left-handed and would be a great option for an away Ashes. He wasn't selected for that away Ashes. Josh Hull was out of his depth, unsurprisingly. Lawrence opened the batting because Crawley was injured, in a move which was more motivated by the desire not to put any pressure on Crawley and to reassure him. They didn't want a proper opener coming in and making runs unless they put more pressure on Crawley. England then went to Pakistan and lost to an extremely average Pakistan side. Despite going 1-0 up, they lost the second test, and their cheerleaders said it was because it was a crucial toss and that they'd lost on a turner. However, in the third test, they won a crucial toss on a turner and still lost. With that series, we saw a number of Bazball's failings exposed. One-dimensional batting, poor bowling at the tail, Pakistan's lower order changed the game, an eagerness to get the game over and done with, despite it being the decider. We'd seen this in dead rubbers in India, at home to Sri Lanka, and then later on away to New Zealand. But this was more inexcusable because the series was on the line. Previous England sides had gone to the subcontinent and moaned about the pitches. This side didn't. Instead, they just accepted the fact that the pitches would turn, but did nothing to adapt, adopting an entirely fatalistic approach of playing. They'd play exactly the same way as they did on a flat pitch, and if they didn't come off, they'd just shrug. Arch shruggers Crawley and Pope looked out of their depth, but they were retained because this was just effectively a warm-up for the Ashes. Stefan Shemlet, the BBC correspondent, said that despite this, England had come away with more positives than negatives. We've had to read rubbish like this, really, from client journalists for the last 3 years. England did actually win in New Zealand, with Jacob Bethel emerging at number 3, who'd later be allowed to go to the IPL to carry drinks, wearing a yellow bib in the mould of Sam Billings. He was then out of form and out of practice by the time India came to England. Bethel playing in the IPL meant he missed the Zimbabwe Test series, which was a single test, which was strange from a side that wanted to save Test cricket. And then again, they didn't really want to save Test cricket. It was just something cool to say and something that the media liked because it gave them something to write about. England would continue with Pope, Crawley and Bashir, who all did well against Zimbabwe, who were probably the cricket equivalent to San Marino in football. England then blew another series against the top side when India toured in the summer of 2025. In fairness, they won the first test with an impressive chase. It was a game that other coaches might have drawn. Unfortunately, they then lost one that they would have drawn under anyone else on a complete road, unable to bat out 93 overs. At 2-1, they had a chance to nail their first significant series win under Baz and Stokes, but dropped chances and impotent bowling let India get away with a draw, and they headed to the last test with all to play for. There was a bit of controversy when England threw their toys out of the pram because India wouldn't shake hands on a draw. Crawley, who was particularly leery, despite the fact he was the only batter in either side's top 7 not to score 100. There aren't many better examples of the arrogance, delusion, and entitlement that Baz has produced than someone as substandard as Crawley chirping away like a world champion boxer. The fifth test was a chance for Baz to finally get the monkey off his back and start to justify the press's claim that he was a revolutionary leader. But instead of being Lenin, he was more like a lemon, losing a crucial test and failing to win the series. A lot of weaknesses of the regime were highlighted in this match. Selection, he brought in Bethel to replace the injured Stokes. The only problem is that Bethel had hardly played a game and was rusty. Form, touch, not high on this regime's priorities, taking second place to slogans and vibes. England rightly went in with four seamers, but picked Jamie Overton for what was, for 2 days, a green top. Overton, more a bowler suited to Australian pitches. That's probably why he played. Key had suggested medium pacers don't get wickets in Australia, which was untrue. I think we saw recently that Nessa and Boland proved him wrong. After all, every test was a warm-up for an away Ashes, so that probably was the reason Overton was actually picked against India. Overton was undercooked and hardly played that summer. On top of that, he wasn't even a test class and had successfully transformed into some kind of lower-level franchise league biffer. He actually retired from Test cricket afterwards, proving my point. Pope took the reins as caretaker captain, despite not being a very good skipper. But then again, he and Crawley have been indulged to the extent that it would have been a surprise had he not been given the armband. All three decisions backfired massively. England won the toss on the green top in ideal overhead conditions and basically threw away a perfect chance to bowl out India for 150. The likes of Potts and Cook would have been a much better bet than Overton, but when every game is practice for an away Ashes, you lose sight of what is required in the present. England then collapsed from a seemingly impregnable position, showing all the killer instinct of a hedgehog. England were then set a hefty target due to the poor captaincy on the third morning and their inability to bowl at the tail, something that Baz has not improved on at all since he took over. Baz, you get the impression, doesn't coach in the conventional way and is a bit more like David Brent. England came close to chasing but fell agonisingly short, again exposing the underlying frailties with Bazball. Brooke is a genuine talent but hasn't been helped by the management. Instead, overindulged to the extent that any hard-headed match-winning attributes have been ironed out, and instead he's a guy who plays his shots and if he gets out, shrugs, which is basically the whole team except for Root. Bethel played like someone who hadn't played much cricket, which wasn't a surprise because he hadn't, and Brooke played one shot too many, which precipitated a collapse, leaving the one-dimensional Smith and substandard Overton requiring 33 with 4 wickets left overnight. This was a test of the team's mettle, a test they failed, with both going early doors and England losing narrowly despite Chris Wokes' Lord Nelson impression. The series summed up this England side, really. Some good chases, some idiotic collapses, poor under pressure, poor catching, wayward bowling. It's very hard to argue that the Baz side had improved year on year. It's probably the opposite. What was really interesting was reading the Telegraph on day 4. Every journalist had predicted England would win. However, after the defeat, they didn't lament it, with the possible exception of Michael Vaughan. Instead, they repackaged it as one of the great series, equating it to the Ashes of 2005. England travelled to Australia for the away Ashes that they had been preparing for 3 years. All that preparation was bound to pay off. The Kookaburra ball in domestic cricket, picking quick bowlers who didn't bowl at the stumps, and picking a spinner with a high trajectory, and despite not being ready, and treating every test match leading up to it as practice, retaining Crawley, a man who got 70 there once. But before they knew it, they were 3-0 down with under 2 weeks cricket played. Why was it such a horror show? Well, despite this series being their sole focus when they got to Australia, they didn't warm up adequately. The likes of Gooch and Boycott raised this issue, but were dismissed as has-beens by Stokes, a man who has 1 century in Test cricket in the last 2 years. Show me what you accuse someone else of, and I'll show you what you are. They had no preparation for the second test under lights and dropped five chances. Baz, veering into Lewis Carroll territory, said they prepared too much. The batting is substandard. Zach Crawley is not there to score runs and duly obliges. This leaves a side at a distinct disadvantage. Pope is not a number 3, probably the most jittery number 3 in my lifetime. He could play in the middle order in the future, but would need to serve his penance in county cricket. Dockett isn't as good as portrayed, but he's still England's best opener. Brooke is wasting his talent, and he needs a coach who will actually improve his game, someone like Langer or Kirsten. Jamie Smith has been found out as a limited batter and exposed as a keeper. Apart from that, he's had a good tour. The bowling is substandard. Wood and Archer are old and injury prone and can't be relied on. Carse is not an elite level bowler, and Jacks is a batter that bowls rather than a genuine spin option. Bashir, dropped before the series started, may well end up slowly fading away in the next couple of years, not just from the England team, but from cricket altogether. England's catching has let them down, and Baz seems to value dives on the boundary in front of the camera more than actual catches. What underpins all of it is an amateurish, self-indulgent and delusionary approach from Key, Baz and Stokes. A team can never improve if it doesn't acknowledge its mistakes and seek to ameliorate them. Rather than developing over the last 3 years, they've just played the same match over and over again. If Baz's time as Test coach has been somewhat disappointing, then his time as white ball coach has been a disaster. T20-wise, he's been fine, but as regards the ODI side, oh dear. The problem for him is that 50 overs is still ample time to adapt to the match and still requires quality bowling, none of which are a strength of his regime. The T20 team can get away with a one-dimensional approach, bowlers who don't take wickets, various bouncers, slower balls, range hitting, diving enthusiastically in front of a Toblerone, all of which are his strengths. Baz has lost all but one game of his tour of India and then lost every game in the Champions Trophy. Rather than extend his remit, giving him both the red and white ball job and extending his contract to 2027, it would have probably been better just to leave it till this current Ashes, then take it from there. When evaluating Baz's time in the job, it would be churlish not to mention the minor successes he's had. Games that we wouldn't have won had he not been coach. I would say Trent Bridge 2022, Edgbaston 2022, Rawalpindi 2022, Hyderabad 2024, Multan 2024, Headingley 2025. In saying that, they chased high targets because the bowling was wayward, so maybe previous teams might have won those games, but chasing approx 250. Games that England wouldn't have lost under any other coach. Wellington 2023, Edgbaston 2023, Lords 2023, Rajkot 2024, Ranchi 2024, Oval 2024, Rawalpindi 2024, Edgbaston 2025, the Oval 2025, and Perth 2025. By my calculations, even a normal, decent coach like Mickey Arthur would have won a minimum of 3 extra series if he'd been England coach at this time, including home series versus India and Australia. But as this regime tells us, it's not all about results. I would assert that this regime is arrogant, entitled, and deluded. The debacle we've had in Australia is partly down to the journalists amplifying rather than scrutinising this. If there had been genuine scrutiny or pressure, it might well have been the case that Baz, Key and Stokes would have had to acknowledge where they were going wrong and amend it rather than doubling down. Examples of this arrogance: not playing warm-up games, playing players who weren't producing because of their ceiling, inventing a new moral code in cricket and expecting everyone else to play within its parameters, playing the same way on turning pitches as they do on flat ones, not playing the situation, bowling the same predictable way against tail-enders, indulging rather than including players, and disrespecting legends like Gooch and Boycott. Examples of delusion: idiotic slogans, things like draws don't count, saving Test cricket, etc. Comments that go against what people can actually see with their own eyes. Doubling down rather than amending, and after prioritising the away Ashes series above everything else over the last 3 years, failing massively but still acting as if they're still on track.